8 behaviors of a stupid person. Stop doing these now. Let me ask you something. Have you ever looked at someone, maybe in the middle of an argument or after they made a ridiculous decision, and thought, wow, this person is not the sharpest tool in the shed? Be honest, it's happened, right? Maybe it was the person who cut you off in traffic, the friend who refuses to listen to anyone else's opinion, or, brace yourself, maybe it's even been you. Okay, now before we go any further, let's set the record straight. This isn't about calling people dumb. It's not about IQ tests or how much education someone has. Because guess what? Even highly educated people can act pretty stupid. Shocking, I know. Today, we're not talking about intelligence as a number or a degree. Instead, we're talking about something much deeper. The kinds of behaviors and mindsets that people exhibit that make them, well, a little less smart in the way they approach life. Now, here's the fun part. What if some of these signs apply to you? Don't panic, because they might. And honestly, that's okay. Here's why. Recognizing these behaviors in yourself doesn't mean you're doomed to walk around in a permanent fog of stupidity. In fact, the smartest people are the ones who constantly work on improving themselves. Think of this as a checklist, not to point fingers at others, but to hold up a mirror and ask yourself, am I guilty of this? And if I am, how can I do better? You see, there's this common misconception that intelligence is something you're either born with or you're not. But that's not the whole story. Intelligence is also about your mindset, your actions, and how you choose to approach the world around you. So if you're someone who's willing to take a good, hard look at yourself, recognize areas where you might be falling short, and take steps to grow, congratulations, you're already ahead of the game. And let me be clear, this video isn't about making fun of anyone. It's not about roasting people who make mistakes, because let's face it, we all make mistakes. This is about shining a light on behaviors that can hold us back, keep us stuck, or even make us look foolish without us realizing it. The good news is, once you recognize these signs, you can start to avoid them and become the kind of person who's not just smart, but wise. There's a big difference. Now here's what we're going to do. I'm going to walk you through 8 signs of a stupid person, 8 behaviors that, if we're not careful, can sneak their way into our daily lives. Some of them might surprise you. Others might make you nod your head and go, oh yeah, I know someone just like that. And a few might make you squirm in your seat because, well, maybe you've been guilty of them yourself. Don't worry, I'm guilty of a few too. We're all human. By the end of this video, you'll not only know what these 8 signs are, but you'll also learn how to recognize them, avoid them, and maybe even help others avoid them too. Because if there's one thing the world could use right now, it's fewer people acting foolish and more people acting with intelligence, kindness, and self-awareness. Am I right? Or am I right? Oh, and one more thing. Let's keep this fun, okay? Sure, some of these signs are serious, but we're not here to lecture or be judgmental. We're here to grow, learn, and maybe laugh a little along the way. Because sometimes the best way to tackle a serious topic is with a little humor. So if you're ready to dive in and find out what these 8 signs are, grab a snack, sit back, and let's get started. But fair warning, you might not look at yourself or the people around you the same way again. All right, here we go. 8 signs of a stupid person. Let's find out which ones you recognize, which ones surprise you, and which ones might just change the way you think about yourself and others forever. Sign 1. Closed-mindedness. Picture this. You're having a conversation with someone, maybe about politics or religion, or even something as simple as what the best pizza topping is. You're sharing your perspective, laying out your thoughts, maybe even backing it up with facts, and they just refuse to hear you. I mean, it's like talking to a brick wall. They're not listening. They're not even considering what you're saying. And no matter how logical or reasonable your argument is, they're just sitting there, shaking their head saying, "Nope, I disagree." Sound familiar? Closed-mindedness is one of the biggest signs of a stupid person because it shows a complete unwillingness to grow. Think about it. The world is constantly changing. Science is discovering new things every day. Cultures are evolving. People are innovating. And yet, a closed-minded person stays stuck in their own little bubble, unwilling to explore new perspectives. It's like trying to win a game of chess while only knowing how to move one piece. You'll never grow, you'll never learn, and you'll never improve if you're not willing to consider that maybe, just maybe, you don't know everything. Here's the thing about closed-minded people. They're often the ones who think they're the most open-minded. Ironic, right? They'll say things like, "I know I'm right," or "I don't need to hear your side because I already know the truth." But the truth is, the smartest people in the world, the ones who've achieved incredible things, are usually the ones who are the most curious. They're the ones asking questions, considering new ideas, and challenging their own beliefs. They're not afraid to admit when they're wrong or when they need to learn something new. In fact, they thrive on it. Here's a quick test to see if you're guilty of this. Think about the last time someone disagreed with you. Did you really listen to their point of view, or were you just waiting for your turn to speak? Be honest, because listening isn't just about hearing words. It's about understanding where someone is coming from. It doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but it does mean you're willing to step out of your own perspective for a moment, to see things through their eyes. And guess what? That's how you grow. The antidote to closed-mindedness is curiosity. Be curious about the world, about other people, about ideas that challenge your beliefs. And don't just surround yourself with people who agree with you. Seek out people who think differently, who challenge you, who force you to reconsider your stance. Because when you do that, you're not just expanding your mind, you're also proving that you're not stuck in the trap of stupidity. Sign 2. Overconfidence without competence. Now let's move on to the second sign of a stupid person. And oof, this one is a doozy. Have you ever met someone who thinks they know everything about everything? Like, they'll confidently explain how to fix a car, even though they've never held a wrench in their life. Or they'll start giving financial advice even though their own bank account is in the negative. Yeah, you know the type. Overconfidence without competence. It's one of the most dangerous and frustrating behaviors out there. There's actually a term for this, and it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's a psychological phenomenon where people with low ability overestimate their competence. In simpler terms, they think they know way more than they actually do. And here's the kicker. The less someone knows about a topic, the more likely they are to overestimate their understanding of it. It's like that one friend who thinks they could be a professional chef because they once made spaghetti without burning it. Now, overconfidence by itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. In fact, a little confidence can go a long way. It can help you take risks, try new things, and push yourself outside your comfort zone. But when confidence isn't backed up by actual knowledge or skill, that's when it becomes a problem. Because overconfident people don't just make mistakes, they make big mistakes. And worse, they don't even realize they're making them until it's too late. Let me give you an example. Imagine you're on a plane, and suddenly the pilot gets sick and can't fly. Someone in the back stands up and says, "Don't worry. I've played a lot of flight simulator games. I can land this thing." Would you trust them? Of course not. They might think they can do it, but in reality, they have no idea what they're doing. Overconfidence without competence is like walking into a battlefield without armor, thinking you're invincible. It's reckless, and it almost always leads to disaster. Now, let's flip this around and make it personal. Are there areas in your life where you might be overestimating your abilities? Maybe you're giving advice on a topic you're not really an expert in. Or maybe you're jumping into something new without doing the proper research or preparation. It's okay to admit it. Remember, recognizing the problem is the first step toward fixing it. Here's the secret to avoiding this trap: humility. Humility isn't about putting yourself down or pretending you don't know anything. It's about being honest with yourself and others about what you do and don't know. It's about saying, "I don't know how to do that yet, but I'm willing to learn." It's about asking for help when you need it and listening to people who have more experience or knowledge than you. Because at the end of the day, true confidence comes from competence, from actually knowing what you're doing. So, the next time you're tempted to dive headfirst into something you're not prepared for, take a step back and ask yourself, do I really know enough about this to do it well? And if not, what can I do to learn more before I start? That one simple question could save you a lot of embarrassment and maybe even a little heartbreak. Sign 3. Lack of empathy. All right, let's move on to the third sign of a stupid person. Now, this one hits a little deeper because it's less about what someone knows and more about how they act. And honestly, this is one of the most harmful behaviors out there. I'm talking about a lack of empathy. Empathy, at its core, is the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, to understand and even feel what they're going through. It's the foundation of human connection, and here's the truth. People who lack empathy aren't just unpleasant to be around. They can actually cause a lot of damage. Think about it. If you can't understand or care about how your actions affect others, you're bound to hurt people, sometimes without even realizing it. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine you've had a terrible day. Maybe you lost your job, or you're going through a tough breakup. You confide in someone, hoping for a little comfort, and their response is, "Well, at least it's not as bad as what I went through." Or worse, they brush it off entirely, saying, "It's not a big deal. Just get over it." How does that make you feel? Frustrated? Invalidated? Angry? That's what a lack of empathy does. It minimizes others' experiences, makes them feel small, and ultimately pushes people away. But here's the kicker. People who lack empathy often don't even realize it. They're so wrapped up in their own world, their own problems, their own perspective, that they can't see beyond themselves. And that's what makes it such a classic sign of stupidity. Because true intelligence isn't just about how much you know, it's about how you treat the people around you. It's about emotional intelligence, about being able to connect with others on a deeper level. Now, don't get me wrong. Nobody is empathetic all the time. We've all had moments where we've been self-centered, distracted, or even just too tired to really listen to someone else's problems. That's normal, but the key is to recognize when it's happening and make a conscious effort to do better. Because empathy isn't just a nice trait to have. It's a skill you can develop. So, how do you become more empathetic? Start by listening. I mean, really listening. When someone shares something with you, don't immediately jump in with your own story or advice. Instead, ask questions. Try to understand how they're feeling and why. And most importantly, validate their emotions. Even if you don't agree with their perspective, acknowledge that their feelings are real and valid. It might sound simple, but trust me, it makes a world of difference. At the end of the day, empathy is what makes us human. It's what builds relationships, fosters trust, and brings people together. And if you want to avoid falling into the trap of stupidity, start by practicing a little more kindness, a little more compassion, and a little more understanding. Because as the saying goes, people may forget what you said, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. Sign 4. Ignoring consequences. All right, moving on to the fourth sign of a stupid person. This one is a little more subtle, but it's just as damaging, if not more so. I'm talking about ignoring consequences. You've probably seen this behavior a lot, especially in people who act impulsively or selfishly. It's when someone makes a decision without thinking about how it's going to affect themselves or others in the long run. Here's a classic example. Someone who spends their entire paycheck on expensive clothes or gadgets and then complains that they can't pay their rent. Or the person who gets into an argument, says something hurtful in the heat of the moment, and then wonders why the relationship falls apart. These are the kinds of people who think only about what feels good right now without considering what's going to happen next. It's short-term thinking at its finest, and it's a telltale sign of stupidity. The problem with ignoring consequences is that it shows a lack of foresight, a lack of critical thinking. Smart people understand that every action has a reaction. They think ahead, weigh the pros and cons, and consider the ripple effect of their choices. Stupid people, on the other hand, live in the moment, and not in the good, mindful way that everyone talks about. They live in the moment in the reckless and irresponsible way. Now I get it. Thinking ahead isn't always easy. Life is unpredictable, and sometimes, no matter how much you plan, things don't go the way you expected. But here's the thing. It's not about predicting the future. It's about being aware of the possibilities. It's about asking yourself, if I do this, what's likely to happen next? How will this decision affect me tomorrow, next week, or even years from now? That kind of thinking separates the wise from the foolish. Here's another example that might hit a little closer to home. Let's talk about procrastination. Have you ever put off an important project or task because you didn't feel like doing it, only to find yourself scrambling at the last minute? It's stressful, right? And it's a perfect example of ignoring consequences. In the moment, procrastination feels good because you're avoiding something unpleasant. But the long-term consequence is panic, poor performance, and unnecessary stress. And yet, so many of us fall into this trap over and over again. Why? Because we're focusing on the immediate reward instead of the long-term cost. So, how do you break this habit? Start by slowing down. Before you make a decision, take a moment to think it through. Ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen, and am I willing to deal with that? If the answer is no, maybe it's time to rethink your choice. And if you're not sure what the consequences might be, talk to someone you trust, someone who can give you a different perspective. Sometimes just getting a second opinion can save you from a world of trouble. At the end of the day, life is all about choices, and every choice you make, big or small, has a consequence. Smart people understand this and act accordingly. Stupid people, on the other hand, act without thinking, and then wonder why their lives are a mess. So, if you want to avoid this trap, start practicing a little more self-awareness and a lot more critical thinking. Trust me, your future self will thank you. Sign 5. Unwillingness to learn. All right, let's keep this train moving and talk about the 5th sign of a stupid person, an unwillingness to learn. Now, this one might seem obvious, but it's way more common than you think. Picture this. You're trying to explain something to someone, a new idea, a skill, or even just a correction. And instead of being open to learning, they cross their arms, shut down, and basically say, I don't need to know this. Sound familiar? Unwillingness to learn is one of the biggest barriers to growth. And here's the wild part. It's often disguised as confidence. These people will say things like, I already know enough, or this doesn't apply to me. But deep down, that resistance usually comes from fear. Fear of being wrong, fear of looking stupid, or even fear of change. And ironically, this fear of looking stupid often leads them straight into the very thing they're trying to avoid. Let me give you an example. Have you ever tried to teach a parent or grandparent how to use new technology? Maybe you were showing them how to use a smartphone or set up an app and they just said, I'm too old for this. Or, I've been fine without it so far. Why bother now? It's not that they can't learn. It's that they've convinced themselves they don't need to. and that mindset keeps them stuck, missing out on new opportunities and experiences. Here's another way this shows up: people who never admit they're wrong. These are the ones who will argue a point to death, even when the facts are staring them in the face. Why? Because admitting they were wrong would mean acknowledging they have something to learn, and that's a tough pill to swallow for someone who's unwilling to grow. But here's the truth: everyone makes mistakes. Everyone has gaps in their knowledge. The difference between a smart person and a stupid one is that the smart person sees mistakes as a chance to learn, while the stupid person sees them as a threat to their ego. The antidote to this behavior is a growth mindset. A growth mindset is the belief that your abilities, intelligence, and knowledge can improve with effort. It's about being curious, asking questions, and seeing every challenge as an opportunity to learn something new. And guess what? You don't have to be a genius to have a growth mindset. All it takes is a little humility and a willingness to try. So, here's a quick exercise for you. Think about something you've been avoiding learning because it feels too hard, too intimidating, or just plain unnecessary. Maybe it's a new skill for your job, a healthier way to live, or even just a new hobby. Ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen if I give this a try? And what's the best that could happen if I succeed? You might be surprised at how much your life can improve when you open yourself up to new possibilities. At the end of the day, life is a constant learning process. The people who thrive are the ones who embrace that, who stay curious, and who are willing to say, I don't know this yet, but I'm ready to learn. So, if you want to avoid falling into the trap of stupidity, stay open, stay humble, and never stop learning. Because the moment you think you know it all, you've already stopped growing. Sign 6. Frequent blaming of others. All right, let's move on to the 6th sign of a stupid person. And this one might hit a little close to home for some people. Frequent blaming of others. Let me ask you something. Have you ever met someone who, no matter what goes wrong in their life, always finds a way to make it someone else's fault? They'll say, it's my boss's fault I didn't get the promotion, or my partner ruined my day, or the world is just out to get me. These people act like life is one big conspiracy against them, and they never stop to ask, what could I have done differently? Now, here's the thing. Blaming others is easy. It's a quick way to dodge accountability and protect your ego. But it's also one of the most self-destructive habits you can have. Why? Because when you constantly blame others, you're giving up control over your own life. Think about it. If everything is always someone else's fault, then you're basically saying you have no power to change your situation. And that, my friends, is a pretty stupid way to live. Here's an example. Imagine a student who fails a test and says, the teacher didn't explain it well enough. Or an employee who misses a deadline and says, my coworker didn't remind me. Sure, there might be some truth to those statements. Nobody's perfect, and external factors do play a role. But if you're always pointing fingers, you're never going to look in the mirror and ask yourself, what could I have done differently? And that's where real growth happens. The problem with habitual blame is that it creates a victim mindset. It keeps you stuck, waiting for the world to fix itself instead of taking action to improve your own circumstances. Smart people understand that while they can't control everything, they can control their own choices, their own responses, and their own effort. Stupid people, on the other hand, waste time and energy trying to shift responsibility onto everyone else. So, how do you break out of the blame game? It starts with accountability. Accountability is one of the most empowering traits you can develop because it puts you back in the driver's seat of your life. The next time something goes wrong, instead of asking, whose fault is this? Try asking, what could I have done to make this better? Even if it's just a small thing, taking responsibility for your part in the situation can make a huge difference. Here's another tip. Focus on solutions, not problems. Blaming others keeps you stuck in the problem, but taking responsibility shifts your mindset toward finding a way forward. For example, if you miss a deadline at work, instead of blaming your coworker or your manager, think about what you can do differently next time. Maybe you need to plan better, set reminders, or communicate more clearly. When you focus on solutions, you're not just avoiding stupidity, you're actively becoming smarter, more capable, and more resilient. At the end of the day, blaming others might feel good in the moment, but it's a dead-end road. It keeps you stuck in the past instead of moving forward. So if you want to live a smarter, more empowered life, start by taking responsibility for your actions. Because when you stop blaming others, you start taking control, and that's where real change begins. Sign 7. Refusal to admit mistakes. All right, here we are at the 7th sign of a stupid person, and this one is a biggie. The refusal to admit mistakes. Now, if there's one behavior that screams, "I'm not as smart as I think I am," it's this. Because let's be real, nobody's perfect. We all mess up. We all make bad decisions. But the difference between a wise person and a foolish one is how they handle those mistakes. And refusing to admit when you're wrong, that's a recipe for disaster. Think about it. Have you ever been in an argument with someone who was clearly wrong, but instead of owning up to it, they doubled down? They'll twist the story, bring up unrelated points, or even flat out deny what happened, all just to avoid saying, "I was wrong." It's exhausting, right? But here's the truth. Refusing to admit mistakes isn't just frustrating for the people around you. It's also a major sign of insecurity. Because deep down, people who can't admit they're wrong are often terrified of looking weak or incompetent. But ironically, the inability to admit mistakes makes them look even worse. Here's the thing. Admitting your mistakes doesn't make you weak. In fact, it's one of the strongest, most courageous things you can do. Why? Because it shows you're willing to put your ego aside, learn from your failures, and grow. It also builds trust. Think about it. Who would you rather work with? Someone who owns up to their errors and fixes them, or someone who denies everything and blames others? Exactly. Now let's get personal for a second. How do you handle mistakes? Do you own up to them, or do you try to sweep them under the rug? If you've ever found yourself avoiding responsibility, ask yourself why. Is it pride? Fear? Embarrassment? Whatever the reason, just remember, nobody's expecting you to be perfect, but they are expecting you to be honest. And the good news is, the more you practice admitting your mistakes, the easier it gets. Over time, you'll start to see mistakes not as failures, but as opportunities to learn and improve. So, the next time you mess up, and trust me, it'll happen, take a deep breath and just say it. I was wrong. It might feel uncomfortable at first, but you'll be surprised at how much respect you gain from others and how much you grow as a person. Remember, nobody's perfect, but everyone can get better. And the first step to getting better is admitting when you've made a mistake. Sign 8. Consistent negativity and cynicism. All right, we've made it to the 8th and final sign of a stupid person. And this one might just be the most toxic of them all. Consistent negativity and cynicism. You know the type. People who always assume the worst, complain about everything, and shoot down every idea with a sarcastic remark. It's like they have a black cloud following them everywhere they go, and they're determined to make sure everyone else feels as miserable as they do. Here's the thing about negativity. It's contagious. Spend enough time around a consistently negative person, and you'll start to feel drained, demotivated, and maybe even a little negative yourself. And while a little skepticism or caution is healthy, constant cynicism isn't just unproductive. It's a sign of a limited and closed-off mindset. Why? Because it shows a refusal to see the possibilities, to believe in potential, or to have hope. And without hope or positivity, it's nearly impossible to make progress in life. Negativity and cynicism often stem from fear, fear of failure, fear of disappointment, or fear of change. It's easier to criticize an idea than to take a risk and try it. It's easier to say, "That'll never work," than to roll up your sleeves and figure out how to make it work. But here's the catch. That negative, defeatist mindset doesn't just hurt the people around you, it also holds you back. It keeps you stuck in a cycle of complaining instead of creating, of tearing down instead of building up. Here's an example you might recognize. Ever shared a new idea with someone only to have them immediately shut it down? Maybe you said, "I'm thinking about starting a business," and they replied, "Most businesses fail, don't bother." Or maybe you said, "I want to try learning a new skill," and they said, "You're too old for that." It's deflating, right? And if you're not careful, you might even start believing them. That's why it's so important to recognize negativity for what it is, a fear-based, self-limiting behavior. So, how do you avoid falling into this trap? Start by focusing on solutions instead of problems. The next time you catch yourself complaining, pause and ask, "What can I do to make this better?" For example, if you're unhappy with your job, instead of complaining about it, think about what steps you can take to improve your situation, whether that's learning a new skill, networking, or even finding a new job altogether. By shifting your mindset from negativity to action, you'll not only feel more empowered, but you'll also inspire others to do the same. Another tip? Practice gratitude. I know it sounds cliché, but it works. Take a few minutes every day to think about what you're grateful for, no matter how small. Gratitude has a way of flipping your perspective and reminding you that life isn't all bad. And when you start focusing on the good, you'll find it easier to let go of the negativity and start seeing opportunities instead of obstacles. At the end of the day, consistent negativity and cynicism are a choice, and so is positivity. You can choose to see the worst in everything, or you can choose to look for the silver lining. You can choose to tear others down, or you can choose to lift them up. And if you want to avoid falling into the trap of stupidity, start by choosing hope, optimism, and action. Because those choices don't just make you smarter, they make you happier too. Conclusion. The true measure of intelligence. All right, there you have it. 8 signs of a stupid person. Let's do a quick recap. Closed-mindedness, overconfidence without competence, lack of empathy, ignoring consequences, unwillingness to learn, frequent blaming of others, refusal to admit mistakes, and consistent negativity and cynicism. Now here's the million-dollar question. How many of these signs have you seen in others? And more importantly, how many have you seen in yourself? Here's the thing. Recognizing these behaviors isn't about shaming anyone. It's not about pointing fingers or labeling people. It's about self-awareness. Because the truth is, we're all guilty of some of these behaviors from time to time. We're human after all. The important part is what you do once you recognize them. Will you double down on these habits, or will you take a step back, reflect, and make a change? Remember, intelligence isn't just about IQ, education, or how many facts you know. It's about your mindset, your actions, and your willingness to grow. The smartest people aren't the ones who never make mistakes. They're the ones who learn from their mistakes. They're the ones who stay curious, stay humble, and stay kind. And they're the ones who lift others up instead of tearing them down. So what's the takeaway here? Simple. Nobody's perfect, but everyone can improve. If you recognize any of these signs in yourself, don't beat yourself up about it. Instead, see it as an opportunity to grow. Start small. Maybe practice listening more, taking accountability, or shifting your perspective from negativity to gratitude. Every little step counts, and if you see these signs in others, don't judge them too harshly. Remember, change starts with awareness, and not everyone is ready for that yet. Instead of calling them out, lead by example. Show them what it looks like to be open-minded, empathetic, and solution-focused. Because sometimes the best way to inspire change in others is to first create it in yourself. Alright, that's it for today's video. I hope this gave you some food for thought and maybe even inspired you to reflect on your own habits and behaviors. If you found this helpful, or if you're brave enough to admit which of these signs you've been guilty of, let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who could use a little wisdom in their life. Thanks for watching, and remember, intelligence isn't about being perfect. It's about striving to be better every single day. See you in the next video.